Algerians go to the polls to choose a new parliament, but the opposition say the election was rigged. With a new majority in parliament, is the old ruling party likely to change? And is Algeria now immune from the Arab Spring? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. Algeria's ruling National Liberation Front won almost half the 462 seats in parliamentary elections. The party gained 220 seats in the vote. The National Democratic Rally was placed second with 68 seats in the National People's Assembly, while the Alliance of Green Algeria came third with 48 seats. The elections have been praised by Western countries as a step in the right direction, but the opposition say the government has missed an unprecedented opportunity for peaceful political transition to democracy. Mohamed has more.
Religious parties were defeated in Algeria's parliamentary elections, bucking a trend that saw them gain power across North Africa after the Arab Spring uprisings. The three-party Green Alliance says the results were rigged to keep it out of power in a country that has experienced decades of violence between radical groups and government security forces. The Green Alliance was widely predicted to do well. Instead, it was the pro-government National Liberation Front that has ruled the country since independence from France in the early 60s, which dominated. The FLN won almost half of the seats in parliament. The Green Alliance, which won only three-quarters of what it had won in the last elections in 2007, says the results contrasted dramatically with what its election observers had witnessed in the polling stations. In the run-up to the elections, the government portrayed the parliamentary contest as Algeria's spring and invited 500 international observers, promising this election would be the freest in 20 years. For the opposition, however, the overwhelming government victory once again smacked of fraud, something that has characterized many past elections. Interior Minister Dahou El-Dikabliya, who announced the results, described the elections as free, transparent and fair. But his announcement came hours before the final ballot counting was officially concluded in a number of provinces, which was noted by the National Elections Monitoring Committee, raising doubts about the accuracy of the results. A day earlier, the FLN Party General Secretary Abdulaziz Belkhadim sounded very confident of his party's performance and assured his supporters of winning.
We are certain that the FLN will win a majority in this election. But just like we accepted multi-party politics in 1989, we will accept whatever comes out of the ballot boxes.
In contrast to long lines and enthusiastic voters found in other Arab countries during elections brought on by the Arab Spring, most Algerians expressed little interest during the campaign, citing the assembly's lack of power and chronic election fraud. The opposition says the old government continues to rule under a new structured balance of power in which those who are religiously conservative were deliberately excluded in order to avert the winds of change that have swept the entire Arab world. The Green Alliance said the authorities have missed a great opportunity for Algeria to move towards real democratic change. But now the government has control again of parliament, making serious future reform once again unlikely. Mohamed for Inside Story.
So, is Algeria immune from the Arab Spring? And do Algerians have faith in their new parliament? Well, to answer those questions and more, we're joined by our guests today. In London, Mohamed Larbi Zitout, a former Algerian diplomat and previously deputy ambassador to Libya. In Doha, Youssef Bouandel, professor of international affairs at Qatar University. And on the line from the Algerian capital, Algiers, Malek Serre, former economic advisor to the Algerian president and an international economist. Thank you all, gentlemen. But first to Youssef Bouandel. Youssef, there's division here between the Islamist parties and the Europeans. The Islamists are saying there was fraud. The EU monitors say not. Were the elections, in your view, transparent? Were they free and fair?
Well, it's very difficult to come to that conclusion. Obviously, the results are very surprising on many fronts. The first one is the turnout registered at almost 43%. The second one is this huge number of seats that the FLN won, 222 out of a possible 432, if I remember correctly. And the third one is the poor showing by the Islamists represented in the coalition of Green Algeria, as well as the two newly created parties. These three results, in my opinion, raise a few eyebrows and obviously question the credibility of the results. But obviously the onus is on the opposition parties to bring proof that the elections were rigged. Obviously international monitors as well as the Algerian administration are saying that on the whole the elections were fair.
All right, well, let's go to Mohamed Zitout. The West, Mohamed, praised the outcome. So did the West get the result it wanted, i.e. no change, rather than the result perhaps that Algerians wanted?
Yeah, hi everybody there. Unfortunately, the West want the good Algeria. For the West is a weak Algeria, and having Algeria weak is by sponsoring diplomatically, helping politically, supporting even militarily, and by other means this regime. The West knows for sure, and they know it by many ways, and thanks to WikiLeaks, which told us that both the French and the American ambassador, they were talking about the Algerian regime on 2009, and the conclusion was that this is a very fragile regime, very corrupt regime, and very despotic regime. This is what they know, and they know this for sure. But they continue to praise, they continue to support, they continue to help in order to reach certain goal, in order to reach certain objective. And among the objective, they have got 4 or 5. Among this objective is the so-called fight against terrorism. It's the gas and oil of Algeria. Let's not forget that Algeria is quite rich.
You're saying basically, Mohamed, it's the West's best interests to have, you say, a weak Algeria. Perhaps the West would say a stable Algeria.
Yeah, they call it stable, but they want it weak. And they want it weak when you help a corrupt regime, when you help an oppressive regime, when you help a regime which has been responsible of the killing of over than 200,000 persons, and that's an official figure. When you help a regime which is still killing its own people, which is still kidnapping its own people, which is still, and this is also the human rights organization which is monitoring and saying that, which is still in fact behaving brutally, behaving blankly against its own people. When you help this regime, you don't want stability, you want your very quick interest, you want the money of Algeria. Algeria has got more than 200,000 billion, more than $200 billion in its
We'll come to that question a little later, whether or not Europe in fact wants Algeria's oil and gas more than they want reform. Malek Sarey, has Algeria, do you think, set out on a path of reform, or has the government merely consolidated its power?
Not exactly the government, but the head of states, whatever, he just will stay for two next years. But everything's changed during last 6 days when the head of states give a charming conference in Sétif on the anniversary of the killing of thousands of people by the French army. So when he called to the people to go to vote, then he got many things. Maybe only for him, 20% of the Algerian young people goes to vote. Now the problem is that the Algeria is divided into two. There is a point of view of the old people, more than 45 years up to the old one. They voted to FLN with the women's. But the young people, they refuse, since 65% of the abstention refusing voting are mainly in majority young people. Now the problem with the future National Assembly, with this new composition, rightly they will know a big change, and they will know strong. They will know, immediate change, unless the head of state himself will take into his good position to push them to change. Otherwise, we might have problems. Maybe will raise problems within the young people, since if they see that the head of state it is not pushing more and more to change, and he will not change, for example, the government to kick out all these old people, and some of them are corrupted or non-competent, then we might have future problem raising by the young people.
Well, indeed, that could well be a problem of the future right across the Middle East, because of the incredibly high unemployment rate amongst young people with a very young demographic. But I want to go to Youssef Bouandil. The government, Youssef, reduced restrictions on political parties, allowed 20 to 23 new parties, the figure varies, and that doubled the number of candidates that stood compared with 5 years ago. So was that an attempt by the government to reform? Was it an attempt to revert an Arab Spring type uprising, or was it all merely window dressing?
Well, I wrote an article about a year ago about the possibility of an Arab Spring taking place in Algeria, and I rejected that idea. I said, despite the fact that the situation in Algeria is very alarming on so many fronts, the idea of an Arab Spring is very remote in Algeria, at least for the foreseeable future, and by that I meant between 2 and 5 years.
Why briefly is that? Why is there not an appetite for uprising?
There is, but let's not forget that Algeria has experienced over the 90s what we call the red decade in Algeria, where over 200 people have been killed. Algeria lost something like at least $30 billion in 500,000 Algerians left the country, thousands of orphans, and so on and so forth. So the Algerians are basically scared, scared of going to the streets to demonstrate, and Algerians also, when they saw what has happened in Libya and Syria in particular, were a little bit reluctant to go. But going back to the reforms, I think that the Algerian authorities have introduced these kinds of reforms, not necessarily to implement a democratic transition, but it was basically window dressing. It was some sort of an aesthetic
a sop
operation.
To Europe, perhaps, a sop to the opposition. Mohamed Zitout, the official slogan of the election was "Algeria is our spring," but the reality is, as we've just heard from Youssef, the Arab Spring has passed Algeria by. Why do you think that happened?
In fact, the slogan was "Algeria is for us, and it will remain and it will stay." And for us, I mean for the generals. The generals, the real power is a military power. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget that this generals has cancelled a fair and free election on 1992. And since that, Algeria was really pushed, and Algerians were pushed to the hellfire, and where we have destroyed a very nice country, atomized the society, killed tens of thousands of persons, kidnapped and disappeared. The chief of the police recognized two months ago, that we had 9,410 violent protests in Algeria. 9,400, that we are talking about nearly 90 violent protests in Algeria. And when we mean violent protests, we have even injured and sometimes even killed person.
So you're saying there has been some kind of spring, but it hasn't been reported in the West. Malik Serey, do you believe, Malik, that the reform is needed in Algeria, and that there has been a degree of Arab Spring that Mohamed Zitout claims?
No, we react negatively to what's happened to Libya and Syria, even in Egypt. We dislike what's going on in what have been happening in Libya, and we refuse to follow, because we had already our problem in 1988. as the two gentlemen said, we already lost 200,000 people, so we cannot again go through this kind of problem. We are looking really for security and we are looking for stability because we have also very, very strong relation with European countries, in particular Spain, is France and Italy. And that's why we are looking how this country are working, because we have appointment in the next market. We are opening our market in 2020. We will be part of the European market, so we are looking how the Europeans are working, and we would like to advance in this way, but in not another way. That's why, for example, the green list of the Islamic didn't get much, because we refuse to go back again. We would like to go through the Europeans, kind of working the European standards. And,
right.
And this is the chance of the young people. That's why we would like that the young people don't raise problem. But
okay, it's back to the young people again. Mohamed Zitout, you don't agree, or you agree?
At all. What they are doing, in fact, they are pushing people to revolt. They are doing everything to push people to revolt. They have had this occasion. Although the parliamentary election does mean nothing for the system, because the system is not a parliamentary. Theoretically, it's a presidential system, and practically it's a military system. In its heart, the DRS, the secret services, who the chief of the DRS, General Tawfiq, have been in his position the last 22 years, while we have seen 5 presidents changing position, and probably 12 or 13 prime ministers changing position. Therefore, the heart of the power is in the hand of the DRS, of the hand of the generals. The problem with the gentleman who is talking from Algiers, he's completely out of touch. It looks like people in Algiers, those who are running the country, or those who are those who are mal-governing the country, in fact, to be precise, are completely out of touch. They are talking about 2020. People
they've certainly retained power. Out of touch or not, they've retained power. Youssef Bouandel, I wonder whether there's an appetite for reform, or whether, indeed, as some allege, there has been fraud. Just under 43% turnout, a very low turnout. Some analysts say that figure could have been inflated. Has there been apathy? And I'll come to you in a moment, Malik Serey, but first to Youssef Bouandel.
Obviously, there is apathy, even if we believe that 43% is the official figure that shows that more than half of the Algerian electorate didn't go to vote. Obviously, when we look at the 43, I believe that I agree with the gentleman from Algiers that the president's speech in Sétif has helped to raise the turnout a little bit. So many observers have put it at 18% to 20%.
Exactly. As some correspondents have reported seeing polling stations largely deserted. I mean, obviously, this is one arranged that we're seeing on the screen now. I wonder whether Algerians think the poll wouldn't change anything for them.
Well, I mean, many Algerians didn't go to vote simply because they do not believe in politicians anymore. There is a very big chasm between the rules and the rulers and those who are ruled.
Is that dangerous?
To a large extent, it is dangerous, because the parliament in Algeria is, to use a Marxist word, is a talking shop. It has no teeth whatsoever, and unlike many countries in the Arab world, I do believe that the change in Algeria would be top-down as opposed to bottom-up.
Okay, Malik Serey, you want to come in. Just from me first, were voters, do you think, presented with the same old faces? And that's why they thought there's no point in voting, because whatever we do, nothing will change.
I agree with the gentleman. The young people, they didn't believe on the government, but they like very much the army and the heads of states. That's two only institutions where they are, calling for them to try to change the things. Whatever the effort of the president, the army will continue to give confidentially or secretly is pushing to play a change, because we cannot go back again. We have 18 million of young people trying to get their place and to push the country to change. So that's why, once again, I repeat, if the head of state will not immediately, push for the change, we'll get some problems by the next summer.
And Mohamed Zitout, people, the voters, obviously didn't see the ballot box as a way forward, did they?
At all, and very amazed to hear that people like the generals and the president. The president who was minister in 1962, 50 years he's still there. In these 50 years, 85% of Algerians were born after have less than are aged less than 50 years. I mean, he's trying to tell us that people have got the syndrome of Stockholm. That means a person who was officially criminalized, who was officially accused of embezzling money, of taking money from Algerians on the 70s, who was officially been accused of killing opponents on the 60s, killing certain figures on the 60s. The person who is now who came in power by the tanks on 1999 are beloved and are welcomed in Algeria. That's the propaganda of the regime. The generals has destroyed Algeria. The generals has cancelled an election on 1992 and has put us on this mess, on these troubles. Now, just also to return when you said the power is in the hand,
I want to go to
hand
Youssef
of the generals.
No, I want to go to Youssef Bouandel.
Yeah.
Now, your reaction to that, Youssef?
Well, what I would say is this. Yes.
Briefly, if you will.
Basically, President Bouteflika has been accredited of ending the violence that chattered the country for the 90s, in the 90s, and obviously he still have a he still has an effect on Algerian electorates, rightly or wrongly. I do believe that his speech in Sétif was decisive for two reasons. The first one, he showed that he still belonged to the FLN, and therefore many people who did not, especially the elderly who did not believe in the FLN itself, went and voted for the FLN. And secondly, many people who were not necessarily inclined to vote did go to vote.
All right, Malek Serre, 2 days before the election, Mr. Bouteflika said, and this is his quote, "My generation has had its time." Are there any signs of that?
That means, first of all, himself, he would like to leave at the end of his mandate. Secondly, there is a new generation of managers. He would like to put it there. But the old party, they refuse to open the door. That's why it will be, he wants to use the young people to open the door closed, actually. So will be kind of fighting between the old party who resist and the head of state calling the young people to help him to open the door and to give a change. This is the main message.
All right, Malek, you're saying it's a new generation. Mohamed Zitout, are we now reliant on the new generation? Has Mr. Bouteflika's generation had its day?
The new generation will revolt and will bring down this corrupted, bloody regime, and the new generation will be in power. The new generation will run Algeria, but not because Bouteflika or the generals, these are criminals who committed crimes against Algeria and Algerians. The history is on move. No one can stop it. Nor the West by praising this regime, nor France, nor America, nor anyone. The Algerian will not miss this opportunity of history. The Algerian will be on its lead and will change their country for the best, and Algeria will again become one of the best countries in the world.
Youssef Bouandel, very briefly, how will we know if it's time for the generation to move on, if the voters aren't given a chance? Briefly, if you will.
Well, as I said a little while ago, I think that voting in election is a meaningless exercise, and if there are any proper reforms, they would come from the top. I don't foresee people from the streets forcing these change. I think the speech that Bouteflika made in Sétif is very telling. Basically, he's sending some strong signals that basically game over. He would definitely leave in 2014. He wouldn't seek a fourth term in office, but probably he would go before.
Thanks to our guests. In London, Mohamed Larbi Zitout. In Doha, Youssef Bouandel. And on the line from Algiers, Malek Serre. Algeria, according to its own officials, has embarked on its own democratic transition, but those same officials say, at its own pace. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. I'm Stephen Cole. Goodbye.